Tonight's faculty author is a talented and creative researcher, writer, and animator who I've been fortunate enough to partner with a number of times over the past few years here at LMU, and I love working with him. Most recently, we worked on a horror animation festival back in October. So José García Moreno is an associate professor of animation here at LMU. He's a veteran animator whose work has been exhibited and awarded at the most important film festivals in the world in countries including the U.S., Brazil, Spain, France, and Mexico. He was born in Mexico City and studied animation at FAMU, the world-renowned film school in Prague, and a Fulbright scholarship brought him to UCLA, where he received his MFA. His work has garnered him numerous awards, including the prestigious MacArthur Foundation grant, Best Stop-Motion Animated Film at Creanimax Animation Festival, and the LMU Faculty Production Grant. He's here tonight, right before he heads off to Mexico City on a red-eye, to share his experience creating his first book, Animando al Dibujo, del guion a la pantalla, which roughly translated in English means animating the drawing from the scripted screen. So please join me in extending a warm welcome.
And thank you to the library. I mean, it's a pleasure working with you guys, and just look behind you. This place is just fantastic. I think we should be facing that way. If not, you wouldn't pay attention.
It's your reward for speaking. You get to look down.
So thank you again. It's really a pleasure, and I think that one of the virtues of this library is that it's proactive and it's full of life and full of this kind of situations, which makes us come together, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, the purpose of this meeting is that I just recently got published. It's called Animando al Dibujo del Guion a la Pantalla, and I just want to just give you a little bit of the background of this brilliant institution in Mexico, which is the National University. It's a major publisher in the Spanish language, and it's just It's the oldest university in the Americas. It's art school, La Escuela Nacional de Artes Plásticas, the National School of Arts, of Fine Arts, is the oldest one in the Americas, and they publish a lot. And we have been trying to create this relation, or at least I have this, ongoing relation with them. And this book is one of the fruits of our collaboration. So. This actually, the funding for producing this manual, this attempt to actually, detail some of the aspects of the process of animation, was funded by what is called in Spanish the development for resources, didactical resources for the teaching of animated drawing. So they're very classically trained. So it's what I really, really love about the Escuela Nacional de Artes Plásticas, which you can find in its alumni, people like Diego Rivera, for example. So is that they pay attention still to classical knowledge and classical way of teaching things, and the emphasis and the value of teaching things with classicism and with a process that actually derives from understanding that you cannot just create things. I mean, obviously you can create things just as they come into your mind, but there's always a process and a way of executing things with grace and beauty. So this is a program that actually it's a support of a project that actually innovate and develop the teaching of animation and the fine arts in Mexico. So it's something that we have been trying to do with the library as well. To actually, the reason why I'm going to Mexico tonight at midnight is because we're trying to start collaborating with them and try to see if we can keep on publishing things. Okay, so this is Animando al Dibujo, which is basically classical training of animation. And one of the things that when they asked me if I would like to actually write and collaborate and co-author this book was to actually go and go back to basic principles, but not basic in the sense that of making it simplistic, but in going back and reflect on the essence of principles and how those essence and principles actually reflect on building up the spirit of a young artist. And obviously one of the things that I I obviously always reflect, and my students here are, can testify that I keep constantly bombarding them with this philosophical concept, because I think that in essence, even though this book is based on techniques and approach the art of animation from the point of view of technique, I feel that in essence, animation is a mode of thought more than a technique. And first and most of all is a way of thinking and of analyzing and perceiving the act of creation and nature itself. So obviously, the first time that I actually came across the caves in the south of France and the north of Spain in relation to the history of animation was with Dan McLaughlin at UCLA. He had this, if you ever met Dan McLaughlin, he was, this crazy Irish, beautiful man with this energy. And they actually created, the UCLA, if you don't know, was the first animation school in this country. And so I was part of, I came from Prague with the Fulbright, as Jamie just said, and came to UCLA, and there was Dan McLaughlin, right? And the first time that I ever started hearing these crazy concepts associated with the art of animation, going back to cave paintings and Plato and the cave, was with him. So every time that I think in terms of why do we need to animate, I go back to this painting, right, which is this boar, and we have like this the conveyance, the act of motion related in a cave painting, right, with this series of multiple limbs that are creating this sense of movement of the boar, right? So obviously we have this worship for images, right? And Plutonius actually said that the reason why we have this worship for animals was because our gods, these third gods, the Greek gods, actually disguise themselves with the fur of animals to protect themselves against the menace of giants, right? So that is why, at least Plutonius said that we have this worship for animals. But in any case, usually what I do is when I'm talking about the essence of capturing the moment and the essence of the dynamic of the image and how important that is to us, I go back to this image, and when I see it, I know that this is the first temple. This is the first temple of adoration, right? When we actually saw these images, and we are not only seeing the spirit of the animals there, but we are seeing the spirits of the animals in motion. So that is a huge connection, right? It's when we actually see those images, the energy that gets translated to us, and that's a little bit the purpose of what I wrote here, is that when you create an image, that image has to be dynamic because it has to translate this pulse and this vibration that it's alive, right? Because if you don't translate from an image the sense that that image is alive, you're translating a dead image, a flat sensation of things, right? So if you do that, and that's what I tell my students, is that what you're translating is something that is non-interesting, that is not alive, that is not a living organism. So what you're trying to do when you storyboard and when you create an animated image, you're trying to create that sensation in the audience that what they're perceiving, that is a living organism. So the image itself is projecting that pulse of energy through composition. So that is why, for me, the animated image is so fascinating. The next point is that, and this is fundamental to the art of animation, is that there are two, in my opinion, there are two derivations or two rows that actually separated with the arrival of cinematic time. The first one is live action as we know it, which is you put a camera and you record these people being here. So what you're recording is time. With animation, what you're doing is that you're reconstructing time, right? So it's a major separation. You're creating time, and the way that you create time is by stopping it. So if you actually, and this is something that I always want to tell my students, is that every single time that I think in terms of stopping time, I think about the Iliad, right? So, because there's a moment, right? And it's a moment for the creation of the hero and the reflection of the hero. And it's a moment in, cheers. So, is a moment of if there's some Greek scholar, please indulge my, what I'm going to just destroy the Greek language, is the apobatai, right? So it's stepping off. So, so what is happening is that the hero is dragging the corpse, right? And he's dragging the corpse, and he's attached the horse of this person that has died, right? And he's in the chariot, and he's just creating this, sense of macho thing that I just killed this hero, right, of Troy, and I'm just running around. And then comes Iris, and Iris faces the hero, and there's a moment in which he reflects about the moment of what he's doing, which is completely barbaric, which is he's dragging a corpse, and that moment he actually steps off the chariot. So when he actually did that, when he steps off the chariot, what he's doing is that he's reflecting on himself because he's stopping time. He has given himself time to meditate on who he is. He has stepped out from the flux of time to meditate on the instant. And by doing that, he's able to see himself from another angle. So that is the moment of animation, right? The only way in which you can control time and deconstruct time is by stepping off of the flux of time. So, being said that, which is a little bit more philosophical, what I would like to show you is now the essence of the worship of the image, and I have some images here that I'm going to show you, and just here. Okay, so so the part that actually I wrote upon, which is the definition of the storyboard, which, if we think in terms, if we go back to this idea of a stopping time and reconstructing time through a series of images, then storyboard is like your roadmap, right? Is your map of navigation. And one of the things that I constantly remind my students is that and this actually comes from Georgi Kepes, which is this Hungarian that actually wrote this fascinating book, which is called The Language of Vision. And he created this examination on the idea of understanding visual language, and he created a huge impact on the Bauhaus, just to mention someone. So one of the things that he said about the importance of the image is that visual language actually defines the way in which we deconstruct reality, and that deconstruction of reality is really important because it changes through historical time, right? So the way in which we actually read reality and translate that into the abstraction of the image actually redefine the way in which we think about reality, basically. So visual language, if we actually see it from the point of view of Georgi Kepes, actually must be adjusted to meet its historical challenges, right? Which, if you ask me what are the historical challenges nowadays, I'll say probably is the time is fast and furious. We even call films that way, right? Which I remind my students all the time that you have to regain your inner time, right? Because they want you to be fast and furious because that's an easier way to manipulate you, right? Because it's everything outside and everything's going really fast. You don't have time to contemplate on stopping time, right? Which is a great privilege to be an animator because it's a constant meditation on time. Animation, if you think in terms from that point of view, is one of the major philosophical tools of our time. It's a constant meditation on moving matter through space in time, right? So all the elements of physics or entertainment or biology or whatever you want to see is there. It's in the principles of animation. That is why animation, if you actually think in terms of the language of animations in modern society, has permeated everywhere. Everywhere. You find it everywhere. You find algorithmical animation. You find motion capture and physical therapy. You obviously find animation as entertainment, but you find it everywhere, right? Because what we're talking about is that we are meditating on time, and we're meditating on the soul as it moves, if we think in terms of Aristotle, right? The principal notion of the soul is that it moves, right? If it doesn't move by itself, it's not alive. So what is it that we're looking for, right? So vision, and this is something that's why and this is something that goes back to the book, is that I'm trying to convey this need for students to understand classical principles. And one of the first classical principles is to understand space, right? And space has to deal with vision because basically vision is primarily a device of orientation, right? And it's about measuring and organizing spatial events, right? The way that you see things and the way that we move in the world is that we are calculating where we are in relation to others, right? So translating your vision into space needs this way of meditating about this reorientation that you have to create in the mind of the audience, in the perception of the mind of the audience, in relation, I think that looks better. This a little bit too. It's how do you create that sensation of space, right? Because the amount of focus of the eye is very limited. So what you need to create when you're creating an image for a storyboard is that you immediately need to tell the eye where to focus, right? And that has to deal essentially with driving a story, right? Because this is, the thing about storyboarding is that this can last a little bit longer, right? But if you translate that into the art of animation, it's constantly moving, right? So it's like, you need to see here, cut. You need to see here, cut. You need to see here. So the eye is just like all around. And then what happens is that you're actually going to focus on this focal point, and then you're going to make an interpretation of what is around, right? So Goethe actually, the Goethe, he actually said that the eye needs completeness. Is craving completeness all the time, right? So I give you this information, but then what I'm asking you as an audience is to complete. And this is what we were talking today in the class, that, and I was making this reference to Lao Tse, which is this philosopher, this Chinese philosopher, father of Taoism, is that the glass works because it's empty, right? It's a vessel because it's empty, right? It works because it's able to contain. It's the same with a space on a wall. The space on the wall, that there's nothing there, is essential because that's where the window goes, right? So what is not there is what is essential to the image, right? So what I want you, when I propose you an image, is that you go and I give you access to space, because if I cluster and saturate everything, you don't have time to move around the image, right? And what I want you is to move around the image. I want you to move in what is now not there, right? In the empty space. That is what I want you to do. But I want you to focus in some points, right? Which in this case, what I'm telling you is that girl, which is looking at those other girls on the Jaguars, she is the one that is leading the frame, right? Because it's her point of view. And every single image is always about a point of view. I want to tell you that it's important that you look at the scene through her eyes, right? And that I do by understanding space and by separating the visual units in the space, right? So separation is a major component, which is something that I am trying to explain to my students, right? That everything is a point of view. So and this is, it's really amazing that we tend to forget about the essence of the arts for the purpose of the sciences, right? because we are dyslexic, as society, and we think that that you can only have half of the brain, right? Either you are an artist or a scientist, right? And there's like this disconnection that it should be both, because both is like marriage in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm asking the students, because there's a huge problem with students that are coming to a level of higher education, and they don't understand space, and they are unable to actually visualize space. And this is a major component, right, if you want to storyboard something. And the first thing that I tell them is, what is the first line that you should do if you're storyboarding something? The thing is that with storyboards, you are the camera, and you can be anywhere that you want, right? So you're looking at something. So what is the first line that you draw? And they go like blank. What is the first line? What is the first reference guideline that you draw when you're trying to storyboard? And they go like, oh, well, the line of the horizon, because that's where your eyesight is, right? So what happens if you are standing in front of the ocean and you are standing straight? Where is the line of the horizon? Well, here. And if you kneel down, and then it's always there. So this is like a little bit of this tricks that what you're changing is the orientation. You're not changing the line of the horizon, right? So it's always about measuring space, because by measuring space, what you're doing is you're creating proximity, and by creating proximity, you're creating a sense of relation between the units, the visual units. If you're creating a relation of the visual units, what you're creating is rhythm, right? Because there's something and there's nothing, and there's something and there's nothing. So it's a pulse, right? It's a visual pulse. And that is exactly what you want to do. And if you're unable to actually diagram space and calculate space, how can you, even if you're doing an abstract piece, how can you create that sensation of relation, of proximity between things, right? So this is I love this from Georgi Kepes, right? Spatial organization is the vital factor in an optical message, right? We are actually able to read things because we separate words. Right?
Yes.
Which is, please learn how to separate things in perspective, right? The closer to the vanishing point, the more proximity between the visual units, right? So everything is connected, and everything is serves to purpose, which means that if you're able to actually do that, what I think is that once students actually learn how to understand space, space becomes flexible and becomes, you can actually mold it, and you can stretch it, and you can compress it, right? And it becomes not like a flat window, not like a flat picture plane, but it's something that is organic, and it's moving, and it's alive, and it's just like animation, right? So one of the greatest things about learning how to control space, and all of these images are part of that book that was published, is that it's because we cannot bear chaos, visual chaos, right? It's like this epileptical things that happen with Pokemon in Japan and those kinds of things, right? There's a need for us to understand what the hell is going on, right? And we try to create and dictate equilibrium, even if it's very, very thin, right? Even in the most chaotic situation, we try to find patterns, right? Like Jackson Pollock, right? We try to see what the hell is going on because we're trying to find what is the process, right? It's more about the process if you think in terms of that kind of imagery, right? It's like why he was doing that kind of continuation with those lines, right? How separated are those strokes? It's not like, oh, I can do that because I have no idea what I'm talking about, so I see Jackson Pollock and this is like rubbish, right? No, well, there's obviously there's a fantastic method in this, right? So we're conveying the meaning of yes, and we're implying a latent understanding of no. And by doing that and by separating things and creating this pulse, what we're creating is a unified whole, right? So every image is based upon dynamic dualism, which is a unit of opposites, right? So everything is always moving somewhere else, right? Because if not, the attention is not there anymore, right? So it's like, well, I mean, if you actually see Tarkovsky and the Russians, you know, it's fantastic, but it's still there's something happening, right? So the deconstruction of space, and it's fundamental for them to understand. And this is one of the coins, you know, when they actually understand that there can be more than 3 vanishing points, and that there can be like a recreation of this fantastic environment, because we're just creating the visual environment. There's nothing, right? We're creating a universe. And I said, okay, so this is one of my favorite, and then, you know, especially freshmen are like, oh. So imagine that there's Spider-Man there, and then he's going to fly because there's someone there, and probably it's a girl, right? The love attraction is there, and she's getting mugged in the street. So you're following her, and there's a panning, and it's going down, and because it's coming towards you, it's getting bigger, and then bigger, and then gets smaller, and lands in the street, right? And that's when they said, oh, now I get the connection between perspective and animation and storyboarding, right? Because if not, I mean, unless if you're purposely creating something that's flat because it's an aesthetic choice, then space is a fantastic way of opening avenues of exploration of imagery, right? So there it is, right? So because what I'm trying to do is grab your attention. So the first thing that I need to know is where the hell things are. So where's the floor? Where's the sky? Or am I in the middle of this tunnel, right? So the first thing is obviously the line of the horizon, and learning how to grid, which is something that this should be, if I may be honest, this should be offered in high school. Here should be already the next step of understanding this, but for whatever reason, this is offered at this level because probably either no one was offering it, no one knew how to teach it, or it seemed that it was not important to actually perceive space, which I think that is not only for animation and art, it can be used for the purpose of visualizing space for a biological demonstration, right? But I guess like we have to rephrase the way in which we actually teach things, right? So 3 points of view, 2 points of view, grid in the space. And then this one is it's a very interesting exercise because basically it's about creating visual references in the sense of scale and how important scale is. When I teach animation, and I'm a great admirer of Winsor McCay, and if you actually see Winsor McCay, especially all his drawings that he made for the Herald Tribune, you know, it's a fantastic sensation of space, and there's the way of creating dramatism by modifying space in the perception of the eye. And basically, here what I explain to students is, okay, how do you create that? And this actually means nothing, because they can be cubes of sugar on a table, or they can be gigantic skyscrapers. So we are absolutely not sure what is the measure of things, right? So another exercise of the book. So the first thing that you want to do is to have some visual reference, right? So basically I created something that is almost like simplistic, which I created like a measurement there, which is a visual sign in those constructions or things, right? Now I have something that is telling me and telling my audience that this thing is the same size as this and is the same size as this because you're seeing those triangles and you're seeing those lines. So it makes sense that those things are equivalent in size, right? And also because we calculated the space, etc. So the next thing that we actually know exactly, which this is obviously the architecture actually understands exactly what I'm talking about, is that the measure of the universe, as Da Vinci said, is the human body. So I know that that building is actually, this construction is actually one, two, 3 bodies tall, right? So by creating that, I immediately created a sensation of space and a sensation of scale within things, right? Which is something that you have to teach. Now, the thing is that with cinematic language, layers play an active role in defining and in reframing the composition, right? So now the way, what we said is that you frame within the frame, right? You're trying to create this focal point and you're trying to drag the eye towards where you want to actually see things, right? So obviously there's something there. And the other thing, because I created all these visual elements, is that I know, and this is the sense of completeness and the psychology of the Gestalt, is that because I already gave you this information, you know that here is another of these, right? So here is probably this size and it's just standing there, even though I'm seeing just part of it. But by nature and because of our brilliant minds, we tend to complete the information. So the next thing is just adding a little bit of value, right? And by adding value, you're creating all the sense of dramatism, etc., right? Which is one of the purposes of storyboarding, and they have to learn that. Now, this one is, I was reading this article the other day about people at teachers from English and literature actually making references of books they haven't read. Like everyone quotes Proust, but no one has gone through, all the volumes. Right?
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Well, it's the same thing with the visual arts. Everybody talks about the golden mean and how to calculate and make compositions. Now tell me, how do you calculate it, right? Specifically, what are the points? How can you create geometrically that pi factor in the frame, right? So it's a little bit, the purpose of that book is to, okay, don't talk about it, show me that you can do it, right? And why it is important to create beauty through proportion. So basically that's it, right? So let's go in through that, and then I tell them, okay, so you can do all this distribution of the space, so it creates this harmonic pi factor because it's correlated with nature, blah, 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 and everybody, and we think in pi, and and then it's, okay, so here's an example. Okay, so I'm doing that, and I'm doing the carré, I'm doing the square within the framing, etc., and I calculate it, and everything is there, everything makes sense. So from there, I can actually come to there, right? So that's a little bit the essence of giving a very specific example on how to make a distribution, a harmonic distribution, because we were beautifully created, and everything is beautiful if actually we think in terms of nature, and everything has proportion, and when we see something that has proportion, it makes sense to us, just naturally, right? Now, in storyboarding, we want to frame it, and then we want to tell a story, right? Because that is what is important. So what I'm telling you is, here is everything's receding, all my lines are receding probably there, right? And probably the first thing is that the way that you're going to do this, the lecture of this image is that, oh my God, okay, so there's that, like this guy with this umbrella, and wait, that giraffe is gigantic, right? But it makes sense because it's well distributed in space, right? So that is what Winsor McKay actually showed me, right? That you can create fantasy as long as you grid the space correctly. Because then, in the mind in your brain, it makes sense, even though it's weird, but it makes sense. And then from here, you're going to come here and just, oh, okay, so what's the thing? She's looking at this guy, so who is she, right? And when you start raising questions in the mind of the audience, you're on track, you're there, right? Because you got their attention. So it's the attentive act. It's like what Georgie Kepes calls the attentive act, which is when as filmmakers and storytellers, but also as people that draw and create images, we are very concerned with the attentive act because attention suffers from two limitations. The first one is the number of optical units it can encompass, right? If you have a lot of things, you cannot see something, right? So you want to actually make a focal point towards something because it's pushing your story forward, right? And the second one is that there's a limit duration of time in focus. After this thing has been there for a long time, you already created your lecture. Can I see the next one, please? Right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be aware of this because the extent of this vividness, right? Because there's like this energy that's flowing there, as we said before. There's energy and there's clearness, and this is determined by the energy of the attentive act. So you're making it alive because your attention is there, right? Not only because the flux of light and energy is flowing towards you, but also because there's an interaction with you. And this attentive energy is sufficient for grasping and relating only to a limited number of visual units, right? Of optical units. So, okay, so the other thing is like, where do I put the camera, right? That's a major thing. That has to deal with cinematic language because obviously we are part of the same father, even though, you know, a lot of people say that we are like the bastard son of cinematic time animation. But we know we're the kings of things. So where do I put, you know, classical exercise, 180 degrees, which again has to deal with understanding space, right? Is if you go on the other side of things, you're going to start creating confusion in the mind of the audience. So it's understanding where things are, right? So proximity of things, right? So attentive act, the nearness, it's the proximity is the simplest condition of organization. So there's coherence, there's verbal coherence, and we want to crystallize an image, right? So the girl is looking at this centaur, this Mexican centaur that is like harassing these two girls there in the back. And so there is this tension, right? There's this edge that it's actually, she's almost there. She's on the third, right? If you want to actually think in terms of thirds and the golden mean, everything is in thirds. And there's this solid presence, right? So there's this monster, and he's creating this action with these girls, but there's like this solid figure, right? And because of the nearness, it's almost creating this clash of energy there between the two of them. So continuation of the line, right? So one of the things that has been said about storyboarding is that the image of the storyboard should imply the action and should imply the motion of things, right? So in a way, it's almost like no theater, right? It's like depicting this, like this emotion, and then it comes through, and there's this value of the image, and you know, there's this thing that is crumbling down, and the encroachment of this woman, which actually is baptized in this boy, this recently born child, and then the monster. The thing is crawling down because this monster is coming from the roof, and it's going to take the baby. So you want to have like a scale, and you have to have this dynamic energy, and you want to have composition, and you want to have this sense of rhythm, right? Which is the other thing, which is, in essence, all of those frames mean nothing unless they are associated with the sum of the parts, which is the whole, and then the whole is the unit of what you're trying to say, right? And then this I actually showed with Jamie in the horror film. So again, it's composition, right? It's here what we were trying to explain is the use of foreground and how can you reframe things within the frame, and then the unexpected. As you're making a lecture, it's always very interesting that probably at first you're seeing this, And you're seeing the moon because it's so vibrant, and then you're seeing the toddler there walking on this stairs, and suddenly, obviously, there's something mysterious and something like, probably even cliche about and then suddenly you see the shadow, right? This is like an unexpected twist. So you're trying to create this sensation, and then the light, and then the essence of the light, a little bit of a ting, look here, right? So you're creating this balance. So what I explain to my students is try to see it in thirds, but also try to see it in halves, right? And how this correlates with the other half, right? It's like a balance, right? So here's there's obviously more light, but here's a huge presence of the moon, right? But the contrast here, it's so evident that makes a little bit of balance with the other side. So that's something that we explain in the book. Oops, sorry. Is that it? Yeah, that's it.
So, Jose, I didn't even see that wolf silhouette till you pointed it out. So I think it's really fascinating. The question I have for you is, did you come to animation as a visual artist in other media, or did you come to animation through wanting to be a filmmaker and starting in live action and then discovering animation?
I think I'll say that I was raised with my generation with cartoons, but I learned to draw very early. So all my notebooks were like filled around the rim, and my interest in animation came through drawing, not the other way around. I was not interested first in animation and then drawing, but I think that it was the other way around. So my sister used to run this film club in Mexico City, and I'm younger than her, so she introduced me to all this weird, fascinating animation from Central Europe, and I said, yeah, I want to do that. Which was not, I love cartoons, and good cartoons are as good as anything can be said and done in animation. But also I think there's a misperception that animation is only cartoons and it's only for children, and it's only the purpose of animation is only for entertainment. And I think that we are seeing just the beginnings of the importance and the influence of animation in society is just starting now. And I think there will be a lot of reflection because it's just an amazing tool. It just concentrates a lot of obsessions, like reanimating a dead corpse, right? They were doing it with electricity in the end of the 19th century. Translating, being a vessel of communication between the spirit that is going to land on the puppet. All these ancient religions were doing it. The golem, right? The necessity of imparting life into things. And I think it's going to come, it's going to do a full circle, and it will come back because of two things. The arrival of the digital dimension, the third dimension, well, the fourth, or whatever it is. I think there are 6, right? 7. And the animation as a tool for the sciences. I think that will revolutionize the concept of what we think about animation.
Sure. I wonder if you could make a comment about the connection between a couple of different things you said in terms of animation and narrative, right?
Yeah.
So storyboarding is part of telling a story and bringing or setting up a way to bring the viewer into a scene or a story. But the emplotment, the sort of the intuiting of the action or what's happening in a scene like this with the large giraffe is something that the viewer does or the reader does, right? So you've got the scene and then the viewer implots it. So I'm wondering if you could say something about two different things. One, the relationship of animation to narrative and the way that viewers implot stories and identify what's important and identify the meaning of the story and things like that. And then also interesting to me would be some things you said about the way you came into animation, how animation might differ from, or animation and storyboarding might differ from a single image, and how a single image might do the same thing. Because ultimately I think, if you see the Raft of the Medusa in the Louvre or something like that, you, as a viewer, even if you don't know the story of the Medusa, you implot something about this raft with these crazy starving people on it. Right? You immediately
you're collaborating.
Exactly. That's exactly it. You're collaborating the same way you're wondering what's this woman doing, why is she looking at the giraffe. So
I think that's, I've been meditating about the empty space.
Yeah.
And the empty space here, right, which is where you insert yourself as a viewer, which has to deal with space, or at least I try to do that point that it's space. And I think that, you have this fantastic stories, great actors, $100 million, and it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, what? And I think it's because we weren't unable to exceed into the inner space of the story. And it's like if you're unable to put your penny into the story, why would you be interested in it, right? If it's pre-digested and everything is there, like like a pâté de foie, right?
Yeah.
So, which is, again, I know that. No, but I mean it in a bad way, right? Like it's like there's like no space for you. Again, space. There is no space for you to move around the story, right? So you are not an active collaborator. You're just a passive presence in front of a story that has been predetermined. So there is no collaboration. There is no space for you to think in terms of, okay, that giraffe is the last of the giraffes in the universe. And this is a Buddhist monk that is driving that giraffe into blah, blah, blah. And this is the evil witch, right? I just made it up, right? But when I was drawing it, I was not thinking about that. It's just as you... But I think that if there's no space for you to meditate, I think that it's when films don't work and stories don't work. Because it's not only that it's beautifully done, but that it makes sense to you, right?
So just one quick follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
Does that sort of suggest that there might be something that we get from the very austere and spare sorts of images that we don't get from highly detailed narratives or animated stories or films where a lot of the details filled in?
I think so. I think that hyper-realism is just... It's scary. It's like we're trying to reconstruct, the other side, the beautiful side of what we're trying to do, and this is my opinion, is that we are trying to go to the essence of language and recommunicate with our own divine source, right? I think that's, in essence, right, what we're trying to do all the time. But the other, more dark side is that we're trying to put forward emotion by breathing life into something of Frankenstein, right? And why do we need that? Why do we need an alter ego that actually moves? I think that's one of the major questions in defining animation as mode of thought. Why is it that we need that? I'm just making the question. I don't have an answer, but it's something very perverse about it. Yes?
Are you talking about hyperrealism, like you mean movies that then replace human beings with animated figures?
Yes. Or hyperrealism as painting, which is fascinating and so detailed.
I'm not so
it's
sure it's
fantastic
spiritually.
technically.
I'm not so sure it's really a spiritual necessity. It's really just a financial one for the people that make movies, because they'd like to just get rid of the actors.
Why do we have a need to get rid of the actors?
It's just they cost money and they're in the
There
way.
you go. Maybe it's true. Yeah.
I'm not for it. I'm just saying that's just a thought came to mind.
But one of the questions that was posed to the creator of Maya. Maya is a 3D program, right? And he was saying, what is the future of 3D animation? And he said artificial intelligence, right? So things actually need to move, not only move by themselves, but react to themselves. So I think in the back is we ask ourselves, what is the stories, things to move, the caves, right? We see that the spirit is moving through these bodies, and the animals are moving, and they're all alive, and we're fascinating, and we want to create. There's these theories of why we worship animals, and one of them is that because there's a distinctive trait, right? And that's how we divided tribes, right? So you're the bears, and you are the jaguars, and you are the monkeys, right? Because there's something that you're attached to. So that was the first principle division of the worship of animals. And, okay, so they move, so I want something that moves like that and with that spirit, right? So I think we are very essential, and even though with all this technology, we're asking the same questions.
Well, are you saying that when you said about hyperrealism that it was scary? I would agree.
I think
I'm pretty much probably the same generation as you. Yeah. I don't see it as being attractive. It's really just the more real an animation becomes in a film, the less attracted I am to it. I grew up with things like, Jason and the Argonauts, or analog animations of puppet figures like Ray Harryhausen.
Right.
And those are just magical. But as they become more real, it becomes less magical.
You know what? And because the front row, at least these two are fascinated with stop motion, because there's nothing like stop motion, because it's imperfect. It has to deal directly with the connection of the puppet with you, and it creates this mantra, right? When you're there and you're in movement 655, it's like you're not rationalizing anymore, right? You're just, it's there, right? It's like so it's a sense of rhythm, right? This breathing is a sense of rhythm, and I think that they will find that with a puppet, because when it's really well done, it's because the puppet is breathing, but it's breathing because of you. And it's true. It's not trick. It's not hocus pocus. It's really the essence of you is coming through the puppet.
I don't think that animation is going to go towards artificial intelligence, because the purpose of animation is to have complete control over what you see on the screen. You have even more control over that than, say, a director of live action.
Okay.
Because you can change anything at any time, whereas in live action there's so much that can happen, that does happen, that you have no control over. And artificial intelligence would take away all that control over what happens. So if you had artificial intelligence combined with 3D animation, no one would be in charge.
Right.
And that is one of the things that draws us to making art, is to be in charge of that end product.
I agree with you, but I think they're part of the same train that it's moving forward, and it's already. Have you heard about the game of life? It's a grid, and it's a thing that it's like squares, and then the square will live if it's adjacent to another square, and if not, it will die. And by doing that, they create these forms that move through the grid. So it's like the basic principles of artificial intelligence, right? Once it's set in motion, it's just there, right? And it has to deal with this knowledge of what we have, which has to do with separation, has to deal with rhythm and patterns, and it's just fascinating to see that, right? I agree that animation, in the way that you see it, which is more of a mystical side of it, is like, what is it that I'm imprinting into that, right? Which, if you think about Collodi and the Pinocchio, the last lithograph of Carlo Collodi in the original Pinocchio, it's Geppetto, the Pinocchio, and the puppet. So the puppet has been sublimated, right? It's not that he metamorphoses into a real boy, it's that he came out of the puppet, and it's a separate entity, right? So I think that, yes, I agree with you. I think that unless we preserve this mystical side of things, artificial intelligence it's motion by itself. And who knows what is going to happen, right? Which is already in motion, so. I don't think that we can stop that anymore. I think it's just, it's like the New York Stock Exchange, right? It's calculated by algorithms, right? And now what has happened with one of the crashes is that the computers actually crashed the system, right? So it's like the spirit of the machine. You know, it's already there. It's beyond control.
When you talk about artificial intelligence, are you talking about, I'm a layman at this really, just kind of hanging around campus.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Loitering.
Are you talking about automatic animation? I don't know what you're talking about, really.
Artificial,
I know what artificial intelligence is, but
what they asked this guy from Maya, which is this top-of-the-art software, it's like the standard of the industry with 3D animation.
Oh, okay.
This was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they asked him, okay, so what's the next thing? Okay, so the next thing is that you want the puppet to actually talk back to you, right?
Uh-huh.
Because it's actually learning from,
Oh, I see.
okay, it's not that he suddenly became Pinocchio and it's a real boy, but it's gonna answer back. I mean, just see her.
Oh, I heard about it, read about it.
You're talking to this thing that actually talks back to you, but it's not only what we have now. It's a program, and we set a series of rules. But then the thing about artificial intelligence is that it learns about its rules. So it creates a conversation with you. So it's CD making a conversation with you.
Yeah, I just didn't know what that had to do with animation, but it is animated.
Of course, because if I set this puppet and it's going to behave in these ways and it's going to walk this way and it's going to, when it's actually, you know, we're teaching actually artificial intelligence now at LMU. And there's this thing about massive. And the thing about artificial intelligence is very much, everything's about nature, right? And replicating nature. So massive, the way that it works is it was designed by the people that actually created this hundreds of warriors in Lord of the Rings, right? And there's a lot of people moving and the orcs and the things. And things is that what we've learned about in the way that we move in groups is it came from this MIT research that basically was analyzing the way in which flocks of birds move. Before, we used to think that birds actually follow a leader. But now we know as a fact that the way that the flock of birds move is by the interaction that you have with your neighbor. And by creating this interaction, you create this sense of small relation of this zone, this geographical zone within the flock, and this affects the next one, and this one affects, and then collectively you move the thing, which is like traffic, right? We're not following one car, we're interacting with the one that's next to you. And by creating that, you create a flow of movement. So artificial intelligence in massive is like how these little things interconnect with a neighbor and they modify the next to them, and then that group of people modify those other group of people, and blah, blah, blah. And
Ooh, it's scary.
Yeah.
absolutely.
But that mirrors in a certain way what happens in the creative process. When you're creating a story, you reach a point, and I can speak from experience here, you reach a point where your characters speak to you.
Yes.
And you lose control of them sometimes. They go off in a direction you had no idea they were going to go. That sounds like setting it in motion.
Oh, absolutely. There's this very well known anecdote of Jiří Trinka in the Czech Republic. And he created, I don't know if you're familiar with those, but it's like puppets, right? Puppetry, real puppets. And he had this beautiful scenes with dozens of puppets, right? And there was like this interview, and he was like animating, right? And he was there in this trance animating, and he was like, Frame 1064, right? So it has to be a trance. It has to be, and he said that he had only one rule, and there was a sense of direction and a sense of order in the way he animated the puppet. So this one goes first, this one second, this one third, and there's no other rule. And he said that the puppets, when he was in this trance, they will talk to him back.
Yeah. I've had characters surprise me on the page. Well, why would they say that? You mean they were hiding behind the door and I didn't know that?
Yes.
Apparently they were.
We were doing this experimental animation class, and we were talking about that in the way that you rig the puppet is the possibilities of that puppet. So you cannot ask a character to do more than he's able to do. And you have to be creative with that limitation, right? He's doing stop motion.
Come show us your film light.
Yeah.
Right on that screen.
Professor Irby. Oh, yeah, sure.
We've been kind of talking about technology and animation. I mean, how has that affected the way that you have been an instructor and a teacher? Because I was a design student in the mid-'90s, and I was sort of the last class, I think, in my cohort at the university that actually did like pay-step layout with press type, and it was, Cork kind of just took it and it changed everything.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the way that I was trained, my professors had a very classical, standard, kind of old-fashioned design background, but moving forward, everything was really different. So I received my foundation with a more old-school focus, but moving forward, every class after me would come in with the expectation that computers can do this. Right. So do you have to undo more assumptions to kind of break down what they think they can do before you can really teach them what they can do, more so than you used to have to?
My opinion is that one of the biggest fears of their generation is fear because it's like open ground, right? With us, there was like, okay, so you have to do it like this way. And learn, right?
Before it can look good, you have to be able to do this.
And here's like the biggest problem is that Command Z undo, right? Super gazillion options to do the same thing. So where is it that it's like Googling, it's not that the information is not there, it's that all the information is there. So it's, today we have this problem that I said, okay, so let's do this abstract animation, and a girl with, like, her eyes went like this, can we get, she wanted guidelines to do things, right? And we were doing abstract animation, which I said, okay, you're free and you can do whatever you want. And it just created this sense of fear that I can do whatever I want. So I guess this is like digital time, right? Where storytelling is nonlinear. I think that's one of the keystones of the way that we can see anything is that storytelling is nonlinear. In any way that you see it, in sciences and everything comes from anywhere, right? And the second thing is that the analogical mind